Joining us now to talk more about this unrest in France is political science and international relations professor Vivian Schmidt from Boston University. Professor, this is now day 11 of protests and riots across France. Do you think Macron could throw the protesters a bone, so to speak, and make a compromise that would satisfy them?
He could, but he doesn't seem ready or able or willing to do it. But he certainly could. He doesn't want to because he's actually taken it so far. He's refused to negotiate with the protesters, or rather with the unions that are leading the protests. So he could. I think he's waiting for the Constitutional Council to pronounce its verdict on April 14th in terms of the legality or constitutionality of the law. And I think at that point, we may see some change.
Do you think these relentless demonstrations will wear the government down? And what does this say about Macron's leadership?
These kinds of protests have happened with just about every kind of reform, in particular ones where there hasn't been much negotiation. What makes this different from previous pension reforms and other kinds of reforms of the labor market is that usually the government negotiates with at least one of the unions, generally the CFDT, which is the reformist socialist union, and the others, like the CGT, the communist union, refuses. In this case, for once, which is quite extraordinary, all the unions are combined and united, and it has to do with Macron having essentially, to the mind of the unions at least, refused to negotiate.
Why is Macron so adamant about pushing these reforms through and not negotiating with the unions?
It's not clear. Part of it, I think, is that he sees this as his legacy. He ran on this reform. He said subsequently and more recently, look, everyone knew that I was running on this reform, therefore it's legitimate. And he sees what he's done to put it through as legitimate. But quite clearly, the unions see it as illegitimate for a range of reasons that have to do with the process it went through and the problems of not having negotiated, they feel in good faith. But I think this is also, he doesn't want to pull back because then somehow he would feel that he's lost something.
April 14th is a key date to watch, as that's when the Constitutional Council delivers its verdict on the reform bill. Can you explain the possible outcomes and what might happen next?
So the Constitutional Council will decide whether the reform is constitutional, but likely as not, they'll declare only certain parts of it unconstitutional. And if it's a partial declaration, it's not a problem so long as they're not essentially gutting it. If they say that you can't, that there are problems in the procedures and or that the content is problematic and throw it out entirely, that is really a slap in the face of Macron and an enormous setback for him.
Thanks so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you for having me.